We welcome you to our study of the book of Job. Today we'll be looking at Job chapter 33, verses 1 to 18. So if you would, turn in your Bibles to the passage and let's begin. In chapters 32 to 37, Elihu makes his speech. In chapter 32, Elihu starts the speech. We see that he is determined to speak and to give his opinion. And now in chapter 33, he asks Job to pay attention to him. He recalls what Job had said about God and that what he said was not right. He then challenges Job to answer him. In verses 1 to 7, Elihu asks Job to listen to him. Verse 1, "But please, Job, hear my speech and listen to all my words." Elihu directly addresses Job by name. Note that none of the three friends ever addressed Job by name in their speeches. He begins with courtesy, please. He asks Job to hear his speech and to listen to all of his words. Elihu had waited to speak to Job out of respect until his friends of Job, were silent. And now Elihu asks that Job pay attention to him. He had said that he was full of words in Job 32:18 and promised not to show partiality or to flatter any man. Job 32:21. Verse 2, "Now I open my mouth. My tongue speaks in my mouth." Basically, he's saying that Elihu is saying, I'm ready to speak. The tongue is the organ of speech. He's opening his mouth. He's opening his mouth to speak. We might say, well, get on with it. We see how long he takes to get started. We've already noted the previous chapter, an introduction. Verse 3, "My words come from an upright heart. My lips utter pure knowledge." Elihu says his words come from a place of sincerity. Well, that's good. First, he has an upright heart. Basically, he's saying he's a good moral man. His words come from his righteous heart. Second, the words he utters by his lips are said to be pure knowledge. Basically, he's saying that he's not being deceitful. His words are free from deceit. They're pure. Look at that word, upright. It's also rendered as right in Job 6:25. Near the beginning of the book, Job said, "How forceful are right words." Job makes the point that if his friends would have told him right words of truth and righteousness, he might have changed. If he needed to, he would have changed. However, the implication is his friends did not use right words. Well, now Elihu is on the scene, and he's saying that my words come from an upright heart, my lips from utter pure knowledge. Verse 4, "The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life." Elihu describes his divine nature. He's really going back to the beginning now. In Job 33:6, he made the point. Elihu earlier said how there is a spirit in man, chapter 32:8. He then said, I am full of words, and the spirit within me compels me, 32:18. We certainly would agree he is full of words. Now he credits God with his creation. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. They were both men made by the same maker. That's certainly true. Elihu and Job, creation of the same creator, along with the other friends and everyone else. They're on the same ground, level plane. Verse 5, "If you can answer me, set your words in order before me, take your stand." I don't know about you, but I haven't seen him present his case yet. And he's already saying, if you can answer me, take your stand. Elihu said that the three friends could not answer Job and were silent back in chapter 32 and 12. And now Elihu challenges Job to answer him, to refute him or his words. While Job had answered the other men, he was confident that Job would be unable to answer him. However, so far, as I said, he has not mentioned anything that required an answer. Verse 6. Truly, I am as your spokesman before God. I also have been formed out of clay. Job often wanted to stand before God. However, as a mortal man, he said that he could not plead his case before God. For example, Job 9:14-20. He needed a mediator, he said, verse 33, someone to stand between him and God because of his dread of God. He was afraid, verse 34. Now, Elihu, having stood by all this time, apparently, and listened to the friends in Job, says that he would be as Job's spokesman, as his mouth before God. He tells him to make his case as he would before God. Elihu assures Job that he too was formed out of clay. He is a fellow mortal. I'm sure Job knew that. But here he felt compelled to make the point that we're on level ground. There's no reason to be afraid. I'm sure Job was not afraid of Elihu. Verse 7. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be too heavy on you. Elihu assures Job that he did not need to be afraid of him. Elihu would not come down too hard on him. That word hand in the passage, he wouldn't put too much pressure on Job. He alludes to how Job requested that God withdraw his hand from him and the dread of him back in Job 13 and 21. And now Elihu is saying, surely no fear of me will terrify you. Surely you're not afraid of me, Job. In verses 8-11, Elihu summarizes Job's words. Elihu says what he said he heard Job say. Certainly, this was not quoted word for word. He did not quote verbatim. All you have to do is compare it with what you read in the book of Job to see that that's not the case. Perhaps Elihu intended to say that this was his summary of what Job said. This was his interpretation of what Job said. However, was Elihu fair in his interpretation? I think you'll see that there are some things that Job never said that Elihu said that he said. He put words in his mouth. He said he would be fair, but I don't think that that's fair. Verse 8. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words, saying. Elihu says that he was present. He tells Job that he heard his words for himself. He then goes on to say what he claimed that he heard Job say. Verse 9. I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Now, verses 9-11 is what Elihu says that Job had said. Again, it's certainly not verbatim. It's not quoted word for word. Maybe it's a summary. Verse 9, let's look at this part of it at a time. First, Elihu says that Job claimed innocence. And so he said, first, I am pure without transgression. Job never said that he was pure. He never said that. Now, Job had admitted that he had transgression. We see that in Job 7:21. He never claimed to be perfect, as if to be without sin. He acknowledged that he had transgression in his life. However, his life was not one of transgression, but righteousness. While Job had sinned, he certainly did not practice sin as accused by his friends. Job 7:20. If he truly suffered for his righteousness, he asked his friends to tell him his transgressions. Job 13:23. And so he told his friends to tell me if the reason why I'm suffering is because of my practice of my sins and transgressions, then what are those transgressions? They failed to be able to produce the list. Second, I am innocent. Sure, they said some things against him, but they were not substantiated. Second, Elihu says that Job said, I am innocent. Job's friends said that he suffered because of his wickedness. However, Job believed that he was innocent. That's true. Now, whether he actually come out and said, I am innocent or not is a different story. But yes, Job did claim to be innocent. His friends said that he suffered because of his practice of sin. Job said, no, I'm innocent. Job's friends, again, said he suffered because of his wickedness. However, Job said that's not true. Job believed he was innocent. However, he never claimed that he had no iniquity. So Elihu is being unfair, I think, in that passage. Verse 10. Yet he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. Elihu reminds Job how Job complained that God counted him as an enemy. Well, that's true. You go back and you read the book of Job, and you see in Job's speeches, yes, there were low times in Job's suffering, that he spoke rashly. He spoke out of desperation. He said some things that he wished he would not have said. And one of the things that he said was that God counts him as his enemy. Job 13:24, why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? Job said to God, to hide your face, to be angry. Why are you angry with me, God? Why do you regard me as your enemy? Again, it was true that Job thought that God was angry with him and that God counted him as his enemy. He still feared God. He still trusted in God, still believed in God. He knew he was suffering, which was without dispute, but he didn't know why he was suffering, and he spoke out of ignorance. He said that God, he spoke of God as if he was counting him as an enemy. God never did not bring this upon him. God permitted it to happen. That's true. But it was actually Satan, according to the book, that brought this affliction upon him. Verse 11. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Again, look back at Job 13:27. And this is a more close quotation of what Job said. At least it's closer than what the other things that he said in this passage. Job 13:27, you put my feet in the stocks and watch closely all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet. So it was true that Job said that it was as though God had put his feet in the stocks. People would be put in the stocks as punishment. And Job makes the point that it's as though God had put him in the stocks. He was unable to escape. He complained how God watched all his paths. He never had a pause. Verses 12 to 18. Here we see Elihu's charge in verses 12 and 13, followed by how God speaks to man. Verse 12, look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Elihu charges that Job in his complaints against God is not righteous. He says that Job is wrong and that he will tell him why. So listen up, Job. Elihu has all the answers. He's ready to tell you just exactly why everything's happening. The reason Elihu gives is that God is greater than man. Really? This is no doubt true and was acknowledged by Job more than anyone. But this is the reason that Elihu gives, for God is greater than man. Job, you're not, he quotes some things where he says some things that he said Job said. And then he says, look, in this you're not righteous. And I'll answer you. And then he says, for God is greater than man. So his reasoning is, here's the reason why you are not righteous is because what you said, and God is greater than man. What was Elihu's point? Perhaps he meant that while man might treat Job in this way, God in his greatness would not stoop to such behavior, bad behavior. Verse 13. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an accounting of any of his words. So Elihu says to Job, God may speak, but man does not always perceive what God speaks. There's nothing required of God. God is not being held accountable. God is not accountable for any of his words. He does not need to answer to man. So there's his point in verse 13. Why are you contending? Why are you standing against God? Why are you disputing with him? God does not need to give an account to anyone, including you, Job. Elihu says. Here in verse 14, for God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. So while God is not obligated as God to give an accounting of any words to man, mortal man, God may speak in one way or in another to man. However, it may be that man does not perceive it, does not perceive what God has to say. So God may speak in different ways. Now, Elihu goes on in the following passage to describe the ways that God does speak to man. Verse 15, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering on their beds. Then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. Verse 15, Elihu says that God may speak to man. He might speak to man in a dream. He may speak to man in a vision. In history, in the scriptures, God at times came to men in dreams and visions. For example, God came to Abimelech in a dream by night in Genesis 20 and verse 3. God also came in dreams to Jacob in Genesis 31, 10 to 11, and also Laban in Genesis 31, 24. Another example, that of visions, is in Daniel 10 and 7. We see how Daniel saw a vision. Note Job's earlier complaint to God. In Job 7, 13 to 14. When I say, my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. There Job spoke of dreams and visions. Job experienced dreams that frightened him, and he saw visions that terrified him. Many of us today have experienced nightmares, bad dreams. It is unclear whether God spoke to Job in these dreams and visions. However, according to Elihu, who had heard Job's complaint to God, he thought that God did speak to Job in this fashion. Dreams and visions reminds me of a New Testament passage in Hebrews 1:1-2. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds. Note that God no longer speaks to man through visions and dreams. He speaks to us, according to Hebrews 1:1-2, through the new covenant of his Son, Jesus Christ. So here Elihu in verse 15 says that, Job, maybe God did speak to you and you did not perceive it. Maybe he did speak to you in a dream or in a vision, and you did not perceive it. Verse 16, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. Elihu says that God opens the ears of men. Basically, that God reveals these things to people. Later, Elihu will say he also opens their ear to instruction. Job 36:10. That is, God reveals instruction to men. Elihu also says that God seals their instruction. And what does he mean? Well, as it stands in this translation, it's as though God affixes his own seal to the instruction as to guarantee its authority, that it came from him. For example, the king might seal a decree with the king's signet ring, like in Esther chapter 8:8. And so here he says he opens the ears of the men. He reveals instruction to men and he seals their instruction. And so it's as though he puts his seal on those instructions as coming from him. Verse 17, in order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man. Elihu speaks concerning men in general. However, he has Job in mind. He says how God may speak in a dream or in a vision, verses 14 and 15, in order to reveal instruction to men, verse 16. And so first, God does so in order to turn man from his deed. This may be a warning against man's bad behavior or bad deed or conduct. Second, God does so in order to conceal pride from man. We know that pride leads to destruction. Oftentimes, Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So, according to Elihu, God speaks to men, gives instruction in order to turn them from their deed or their wrongdoing. Verse 18, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Elihu says that God keeps man's soul back from the pit. He speaks metaphorically of the grave. God keeps his life from perishing by the sword. If he perishes, he goes to death, to the pit, the grave. Elihu mentions the pit 5 times here in Job 33, verses 18, 22, 24, 28, and 30. And so according to Elihu, we see that God seeks to keep him from perishing. That ends the lesson for today. And Lord willing, we'll continue with the second half of this chapter of the book of Job. We hope it's been helpful, and we encourage you to study more of God's word. Thank you for being here today.